Hello, my name's Jackie and welcome back to my channel. I'm an aspiring writer and I'm also a reader, and I thought today I might do a reading wrap-up with everything I've read in Q1 of 2021. Now, for the past couple of years I've read about 75 books a year. This is actually the first year in a while when I haven't done a target on Goodreads, and the reason for that was because even though I think reading and reading widely is really important for writers, I feel like writing is more important. And one of the things I noticed happening last year, because I started a new job last year, which was a bit more taxing than my old one, more rewarding as well, but there was more of my brain power involved. I found that there was some points when I was focusing on trying to get my reading quota up when I could have been focusing on writing. So this year I'm just taking it as it comes. So far I've read 17 books, so I think if I keep up that pace for the rest of the year, it'll be about 68 books. But I haven't had the best reading luck this year, and I have lost my enthusiasm a little bit. I do tend to have spurts of 1 or 2 weeks where I just won't read anything. So fingers crossed that improves in the coming months. But anyway, let's get into my books from the first quarter of 2021. The first book I read was The Case of the Missing Marquess, which is the first Enola Holmes book. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with this series, Enola Holmes is the younger sister of Sherlock Holmes. So Sherlock and his brother Mycroft are both in their 30s, I think by now, and Enola is 14 in the book. And the book starts when her mother goes missing and she decides to go and find her. Now, what prompted me to read this was that I actually saw the film on Netflix. So the film ages Enola up a little bit. It has, don't remember what her name is, but the girl from Stranger Things. And I found the film really enjoyable. Now, if you watch the Critical Drinker channel on YouTube, I think he called it fanciful fluff, which I agree with, but it was still really enjoyable. And one of the things I liked about it was, one, how it handled like a cozy mystery but with a YA detective, and two, how there were two parallel plots. And these are both things that, not so much the cozy mystery, though there is an investigative element, but definitely the parallel plots. This is something I was struggling with in my fantasy hot mess project. So when I saw the film, I was then inspired to get the book to basically see how this was attacked in writing. And what I realized in hindsight was it probably wasn't attacked in the best way, because what happened in the film was that the two plots were searching for the missing mother, as well as this Marquess who has run away from home, and it turns out there's someone who wants to come and kill him who clashes with Enola. And the two parallel plots don't actually happen at the same time. Like, basically one gets put on hold so she can address the other one. And that is one way to approach it, but I don't know if it's the best way. In terms of the book, unfortunately, I didn't enjoy the book as much as the movie. This is probably just because it was aged down. It was a middle grade book. I also felt there wasn't as much to the plot. Enola didn't have any personal connection with the Marquess. From memory, I think she sort of just heard he was missing and then decided to look for him, which made no sense because she already had this investigation where she was following her mother's trail, so why would she just put that on hold? I felt like that was handled much better in the movie. The other thing was, there are a few things in the book where Enola sort of commented on not being that clever or not like her brothers, and she demonstrated that with some of her actions. And I think it would have been more engaging if she had have been a bit sharper like she was in the movie. So I ended up giving this 3 stars. If it had have been for a YA audience, I probably would have knocked it down to 2. But because it is a middle grade book, you do expect plots and characters to be a little bit simpler. The next book I read was Stray Souls, which is the first book in the Magical Anonymous series by Kate Griffin. Now, I came across Kate Griffin under one of her other pen names, Claire North, last year when I read the first 15 Lives of Harry August, which I thought was really cool. If you like Blake Crouch type of novels, I highly recommend it. So because I enjoyed it so much, I decided to look at her other books and discovered she has 3 different pen names, and Kate Griffin is her one that's for more fantasy things. So Magical Anonymous is about a girl who is able to walk through walls and doesn't realize she's actually a shaman. And because she can do this strange thing and she assumes other people in London also have strange things happening, she sets up a Facebook group called Magicals Anonymous, where they all have their weekly meetings and talk about the struggles of the magically inflicted. At the same time, something dark is happening in London. Grey Dawn is a spirit who sort of watches out for souls in the late hours of the night, early hours of the morning, and apparently she has gone missing, and her dog, he is out looking for his mistress and killing people, as you do. So basically what happens is they need a shaman to help fix this. They need someone to represent the soul of the city and save it. And there's a goblin who is the second best shaman in the world, but everyone hates him because he's a goblin and not the easiest guy to get along with. So he decides that it's going to be this girl's mission to do it. So the book follows her trying to investigate what's happening with the city and her teaming up with the different members of Magicals Anonymous to sort it out. So this was quite an interesting book. The characters of Magicals Anonymous tended to be more caricatures than anything else. Like there's a vampire who's incredibly squeamish and very focused on hygiene and wants like someone to have a full health check before he takes any of their blood type of thing. And that was quite fun and not something you often see in fantasy. But because of that, I feel like we almost had two separate books. So there was the one with all the quirky characters of Magicals Anonymous, and then there was the one of there's this dark force trying to kill the city of London. And they almost didn't go together a lot of the time. Like once we got into this darker plot and things started moving, anytime we went back to someone's quirky introduction, and there were generally like sort of 1.5 page chapters where they did their Magical Anonymous intro. So it's like, hi, I'm Sharon. Hi, Sharon. And here's a bunch of paragraphs about me. And while that was cool and quirky on its own, I felt like it really slowed down this plot and it drained the sense of urgency I felt. There was also this element where, so one of the parts of being a shaman is sort of you can become at one with the city, and Sharon, the main character, the shaman, when she became at one with the city, she sort of like disappeared almost and could hear everything that was going on. So you'd have one line of someone's thoughts and what someone was doing and another line, and it was a really interesting way to do it, but it did grow quite tiresome by the end of it. And in the last maybe 25% of the book, I sort of felt like I was really slogging to get through it. So this is something that started as a 5-star read for me, but by the end, like I was really tired of the tangents. I was really tired of the rambling. And even though it was very intentional on the author's part, I felt, and it was very consistent with each of the characters, by the end, I did feel like I was working to get through it, and it wasn't really my cup of tea. So after I finished, I gave this 3 stars. The next book was Take a Hint, Dani Brown. Now, this is where I started my like rom-com book focus for this quarter, because I was struggling with books. I wasn't feeling that enthusiastic. Personally, the start of 2021 wasn't great for me. I was in a bit of a funk and feeling very homesick for most of January, so I started looking for books purely that would make me feel good. So Take a Hint, Dani Brown was recommended by various booktubers and it had good ratings on Goodreads, so I gave it a try. Now this is one of 3 books that are about the different Brown sisters and their romances. However, they are standalone, so you can read this without having read the previous one, which is what I did. So Dani Brown's a lecturer at a university. She's very ambitious about getting published and teaching and so on, and she is very anti-commitment. She is a fan of one-night stands and flings, but doesn't really want to settle down. Meanwhile, Zafir is one of the security guards at the university, and he's sort of had a thing for Dani forever. Like, every time she walks in, it's like his heart stops, and she's so beautiful, and it's really sweet seeing him write about her. So the inciting incident is when there is a fire drill in the library or the part of the campus where they both work, and Dani gets trapped in an elevator, and she doesn't realize it's a drill. She thinks there's a fire and she's trapped and she's going to die. Zafir goes out and does his thing, like making sure everyone's out of the building, notices she's not there, and then runs back in to get her. He ends up prying open the elevator and like carries her out. It's all very swoon-worthy. And then a bunch of pictures get snapped and they get shared online. And suddenly they go viral as a couple. And it turns out Zafir has like a charity he's trying to get up off the ground, so this publicity could be really good for him. So they decide they're going to fake it as a couple, like for the next month or so until the news cycle dies down, so he can get the benefit from it. What happens is obviously they fall for each other. So this was really engaging. It started really well. I thought their banter was great. Really steamy tension between them. What I didn't love was when we got to the 3rd act, and there always has to be a 3rd act complication, so they break up and then find each other again. And it felt incredibly contrived to me. Like, I felt, the relationship was going really well, and Dani sort of created a problem just so there would be a problem. For me, it just didn't feel organic. And because of that last third of the book was really unsatisfying. I almost feel like it would have been a better book if we just finished when they were happy rather than creating drama for the sake of drama. So I think it would have been a 4-star, but because that ending, I also knocked it down to 3 stars. So a lot of 3-star reads so far. The next book I read was This Savage Song by Victoria Schwab. And this was a reread. I was like at the point where I'm like, okay, I need something reliable that I know I love. So I previously read this in 2016, I think, and this was my first time revisiting it. This Savage Song is set in a world where bad deeds lead to monsters. So if you kill someone, that generates a monster. If there's an act of mass terror, that creates a monster. And it's in a city that is divided into 2 halves. One is one where people pay the leader of that half of the city to be safe. And the other one is one where, monsters run freely, but it isn't where monsters run freely, but there is like a police force that's taking care of them and trying to keep people safe. It's also not corrupt, because one of the things we learn about the safe side of the city is it's not the best system. So our 2 main characters are Kate Harker and August Flynn, and they are actually children of the respective ruling families. So Kate has been away at boarding school for years. She's been rebelling and trying to do more and more wrong to eventually go back home to be with her father. And she wants to basically prove that she is as monstrous as him. So she's a regular teenage girl in a world of monsters who wants to be monstrous. Meanwhile, August is a monster. He is a Sunai, which is a monster that's created from acts of mass tragedy. And they use instruments or music to eat people's souls, and they can only eat the souls of sinners. And where his character starts is actually from the opposite point of Kate. So he is a monster and he wants to be human and just wants to pass as human. And he gets his opportunity to do this when he is sort of sent undercover to the same school as Kate Harker and pretends to be a human boy amongst all of the human students. So the 2 of them connect and become friends, and then one day there is an attack on the school where August's family has been framed and they need to run and survive while they figure out what happened. So I just really love this book. I like the characters, I find the world fascinating, I like the different types of monsters. I am a fan of evil father figures, as you may have gathered from Powerless. And yeah, in general, it's just a good fun read. The other thing was, this time I was actively reading it as a writer rather than a reader, because it is from 2 points of view and my fantasy hot mess has 2 main point of view characters. So I wanted to see how an author I like, Victoria Schwab, in a book that I like, This Savage Song, tackled that. And one of the things that was really interesting was that there wasn't a lot that happened before the midpoint of the book. Like, it was very slow paced. So like the first 10 chapters were maybe all one day with the 2 children preparing to go to school before they met each other. And I found that to be really interesting, just seeing how you can pass time so slowly yet still keep readers really engaged by having an interesting world. And on my side, I think one of my weaknesses is probably that I try to do too much. So there's too much action and it can probably move a bit too quickly. So it was just an interesting reminder to see that. So as I mentioned, this was a reread. I already knew I loved the book and I gave it 5 stars again the second time round. The next book was The Litigators by John Grisham. Now, I'd never read any John Grisham before, and I'd always been under the impression that he was a thriller writer. And this book was not a thriller. Like, it was sort of a dark legal comedy, and I loved it, but it was not what I was expecting. So The Litigators is basically about 3 lawyers. The first one, whose name might be David, he is in his late 20s, I believe. He's working at a big corporate law firm and he works like 80, 100-hour weeks. He never sees his wife. And even though he's getting paid well for it, he's like slowly dying in this job. The other 2 lawyers are partners at their own company and they're like ambulance chasers. Their office is down the road from a really dangerous intersection, and basically every time there's a crash at the intersection, they're ready and waiting there, handing out their cards to the people involved just so they can sue someone. One of the lawyers, the older one, he is happy with this line of work. It works. They can reliably predict their income each year. He's fine just coasting along with what they've got. The other one, though, is really ambitious and he wants to get into like some Erin Brockovich, what do they call a mass lawsuit? Class action. So he wants to get involved in the class action because he's heard that they pay really well when they work. So that's everyone at the start of the book. And David, our young lawyer, decides he's had enough and he quits his job, goes out, gets smashed, and then happens to stumble across the other guy's law offices and offers his services. So he joins them as a 3rd lawyer. Meanwhile, our ambitious lawyer, he is visiting one of their clients who's died and obviously wants to be involved in the will or something, I can't quite remember. And one of the people's relatives makes a comment that, oh, they died because they took this drug. And the lawyer starts investigating and sees there's already been some suspicion around this drug. So what he decides, with no research whatsoever, is to start contacting all of their clients, say that this drug is bad, it causes problems, and they're going to do a class action lawsuit. And this poor new lawyer who's come from like corporate where everything's done perfectly is sort of thrown into this world where they really don't have any idea what they're doing. We get to see the point of view of the company that produced the drug and how they're planning to fight this, and it's just a book about biting off more than you can chew and trying to keep it all together even as you're watching it unravel in front of you. So it was a lot of fun and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was The Rapture by Liz Jensen, and this is like a climate change apocalypse type story. So it's set now or not too distant future, and the world is getting noticeably hotter and just more and more things are going wrong with the planet. And the main character is a psychologist who is wheelchair bound following a car accident, I think 2 years before the book starts. And she has just been employed by a psychiatric institution. I think it might just be for children. And the main patient she is assigned to is a 16-year-old girl called Bethany who has been locked up because she killed her mother. And she has never said why. One of the treatments they tried on her in the past was electric shock therapy. And what happens after she has this electric shock therapy is she starts to have vision and she's able to predict things that will go wrong in the planet. So she predicts a hurricane in Argentina, I think. She predicts something somewhere else. And then she predicts like the event that's going to start the environmental apocalypse. And what's interesting is that this girl is like in a psychiatric institution, so everyone thinks, oh, it's just delusions, it's not real. But what happens is the different things she predicts all start coming true. And then Gabrielle, the main character, she ends up in a relationship with a man who I cannot remember what he does. This is the problem of waiting until the end of the quarter to review your books. That he does, I think he is a physicist at a university, so he has some insight into how some of the things Bethany's predicting might happen. And as they start investigating it, they realize that there's more and more merit to Bethany's predictions, and they need to find a way to warn people without coming across as crazy, for lack of a better word. If people know where these predictions are coming from, no one will believe them. So it's sort of this spiral of desperation where they try to find someone who'll take them seriously and basically try to prevent the world from ending. All in all, I thought this book was very good. The characters were believable. I did have one like little pet peeve, which was that Gabrielle kept referring to like the man she gets involved with as the physicist. And it's like, you know this guy, you've had sex with this guy, surely you can say his name. Like, it just seemed really strange to be using like someone's job title to describe them when it's like, you know, it's someone you know intimately. But that was a very small pet peeve. There was also something which was believable but also personally frustrating, which was how much Gabrielle put herself down. She had a lot of insecurity about her ability to be seen as an attractive woman and to be a partner to this man since her accident. And I get that, it's relatable, but it was also incredibly frustrating. I just wish we had more women with good self-esteem in books. And I never know whether I should be docking points for something I just personally find annoying when it's not an objective flaw with the book, but it was something I found personally annoying. So all in all, I thought this was really good. It was a fascinating take on climate change. The whole Bethany situation was really interesting and also like quite heartbreaking when you hear her backstory. So this was 4 stars for me. The next book was 6 Weeks by Mer Lafferty. Now Mer Lafferty actually has a podcast called I Should Be Writing, which I highly recommend. I think she posts twice a week now, and it's just nice to have a bit of a laid-back discussion about writing, especially when you're not feeling motivated. 6 Weeks is a book about clones in space. So it starts when there are 6 clones who are manning a spaceship that's taking a whole thousands of humans, I think, to colonize a new planet. And these 6 clones wake up in their incubators and they see that all of their old bodies have been killed and they don't know why. So generally what happens in this world is that clones get cloned into new bodies that are like 20-year-old versions of themselves, but all of their memories are saved and preserved to put into the new body. What's happened this time is that their memories haven't been backed up since they first boarded the ship 25 years ago, so they have no idea what's happened in the last 25 years and what culminated in this event which led to everyone being killed. So this book is really cool because on one hand you've got this closed mystery, like they're all on the spaceship, they're not going anywhere. You've got these 6 people who don't know if they can trust each other, and then you've also got flashbacks to each of their lives over the past like 200 to 400 years. I think all of the clones are between 200 and 400 years old. So yeah, you get to see their backstory. What you realize is that there are connections between them which might not immediately be apparent. You learn that people aren't who they think they are. So super interesting, lots of fun. I gave this 4 stars and I can't remember why I didn't give it 5. Maybe I should bump it up. The next book I read was The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, and when I was looking for just a fun rom-com that I would love, that would make me forget about life, this was it. I loved it so much. So the main characters are Lucy and Joshua, who both worked for competing publishing houses that were merged about a year before the book starts. They are both assistants to the CEO of their respective companies, which means the CEOs are both locked in offices and they sort of have the same shared workspace in front of the respective offices. So the book is from Lucy's point of view, and she feels like they've never had a good relationship. She thinks Joshua hates her, and so she spends her day filling it with like games that they play together. So things like trying to imitate each other in the mirror or trying to annoy each other in different ways. And her goal has always been to make him smile or to get some sort of reaction out of him because he always seems so serious and stern, and basically everyone in the office is terrified of him because he's not a personable guy. This changes one day when in the elevator she is wearing like a sexy little dress to get under his skin and he kisses her, and it is a really good kiss and she can't stop thinking about it afterwards, and this sort of turns into like a love-hate flirty banter type of thing, which leads to her agreeing to go with him to his brother's wedding as his date. And it's a little bit hard to say any more than that without giving it all away, but it's an enemies to lovers type of romance. It's done really well, it's a lot of fun, and I highly recommend it. So this was a 5-star read for me. Now after this, because I loved The Hating Game so much, I decided to read Sally Thorne's other book, which is 99% Mine. And unfortunately I didn't like this one as much. So 99% Mine is about Darcy and Tom, and from Darcy's point of view. She is living in her late grandmother's house and needs to fix it up to sell it to split the proceeds with her twin brother. Her childhood friend Tom is going to be working on the house and fixing it up with his construction company. And she has lots of feelings for Tom and lots of urges for Tom and finds him absolutely delicious, and she is insatiable in her desire. This was also well written, there was a lot of humour, it was engaging. What I didn't like about it as much was that there was no real relationship. Like the fun thing about The Hating Game was they had this kiss, and then there was flirting, then there was sort of this warming up or fake relationship which built up to the wedding weekend when she was posing as his girlfriend. So even though like they hadn't declared their love for each other or it wasn't officially a relationship, we got to see them being a couple and all of the fun that that entails. Whereas 99% Mine was mostly just Darcy was longing for Tom and thinking about how hot he was, and there wasn't even like really kissing or touching or any of the fun stuff you want when you read a romance. So it got to, is it a spoiler when I say the couple in a romance book get together? But they got together at the end, and I felt like it would have been better if that had happened earlier and there was some other conflict that meant they couldn't stay together or they couldn't admit their feelings to each other, rather than waiting until quite late in the book to actually get together. So because of that, I gave this one 3 stars, though I do really like Sally Thorne's writing style, so when her next book comes out, I will be trying it. The next book was You Deserve Each Other, continuing with my searching for rom-coms that will make me forget life. So this book is about Naomi and Nicholas, who are getting married in about a year's time, I believe, and they've gotten to the point where they can't stand each other anymore. The book is from Naomi's point of view, and a lot of the beginning of it is all about what he does wrong and why he's so annoying and how he makes her feel bad about herself. And she has the brilliant idea that maybe rather than trying to be like sort of a martyr in the relationship, like she's trying to be the good girlfriend, the good wife, maybe she should just like start being really bad to him until it gets to the point where he dumps her. And the reason he needs to dump her is because she's already had to put like a lot of money into the wedding and so on. And I believe she thinks his parents will make her pay for it if she calls it off. So she needs him to be the one to call it off. So the premise of this book is that these two people start being really horrible to each other, but they start being their genuine selves as well when they're being horrible to each other, and they realize how perfect they are for each other. And I thought that was such a good premise. Like, I was really on board for that. I feel like it didn't quite work with the execution. And the reason for that is because I don't think the author committed to each stage that the relationship needed to go through. So first we get the intro where Nick seems to be this awful guy who would want to be with him. Then Naomi starts being like really annoying to get back at him. He never really fights back that much. Like, he does a couple of small things, but not really not really at the same extent. It's not clear that he's trying to get out of the relationship. And then later, it becomes really clear that he really does still love her and he wants to work on the relationship. And so then you've just got Naomi who's sort of going back and forth like, oh, I have this soft spot for him, but now I'm going to go back and do this horrible thing, but oh, I have this soft spot for him. And I feel like it would have been much cleaner if they had Naomi hates Nick, she decides to get back at him. There's this full-on feud where they realize that, ooh, they quite respect and like this other side of the person. Then they start having the soft feelings, and then lovey-dovey loviness. Can you tell I'm a writer? I think if it had been like that sort of cleaner structure, it would have worked, but instead there was a lot of going back and forth between, am I trying to make him hate me, or do I love him and have this soft spot for him? And that meant, just because it was going back and forth, there wasn't that clean transition. It often didn't feel like the plot was moving forward. So for that reason, I gave this 3 stars. The next book I read was Jurassic Park, which I'd never actually read before, and I loved it. I thought it was so interesting, so clever. There was so much about dinosaurs that I didn't know, and just the perfect illustration of how, people's hubris has real consequences. It's almost like a modern day Greek tragedy in that men think they can overcome nature and nature always wins. And there's a lot of interesting discussion on like science and whether because you can do something you should do something, which I personally found quite interesting because I think that's something I'd like to incorporate in my own YA superheroes meets the Russian mafia book, Powerless, because some of the discussion there is around the science around the super gene mutation and how that should be used and whether it should be used in other ways. So my writer side really appreciated it for that reason. In terms of pace and structure and story, I thought it was really well paced. The stakes were high and the pace was fast, yet we were also able to take moments to talk about the philosophy of it a little bit more, the science behind Jurassic Park a bit more. So it was really well balanced. There was only one thing that I didn't like about this book, and that was the granddaughter character, who was so annoying. Like, I get that she's meant to be, a 6-year-old girl, something like, she's quite young, and I get that that means she'd be whiny and she'd get bored and she'd go, stupid T-Rex, na 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 na, like that type of thing. Like, I think that's totally fine. What annoyed me was that she had brushes with death, then immediately after went back to being completely annoying and whiny and wouldn't be quiet. It's like, you think after 3 or 4 brushes with death where a T-Rex tries to kill you, you would shut up. Like, yes, I get that she's young and annoying, but even, children learn very quickly often. Like, that's what they're famous for. Their brains are far more malleable than adults are. And, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that maybe after a couple of times where she complained or made noise and that drew the dinosaur's attention, maybe she would start being quiet. I think as a woman, the fact that it was a female child and the male child had his shit together, I think that also bothered me a bit. Though there was also an age thing there. I think the older child was maybe 12, but yeah, in general, I just found she was whiny to the point where it stopped being necessary or believable. So because of that, I gave it 4 stars. If her character had have been a bit more tolerable, it would have been a 5-star read. The next one was another rom-com attempting to find the same magic that I found with The Hating Game, and it was To Have and To Hoax. Now, this is a Regency era romance between Violet and James, I believe, and they get married after an illicit moment on a balcony that's by her mother, but it turns out to be all right. They really love each other, so it all worked out well in the end, until something happens between a prologue where they met each other and chapter 1 where the book starts, and something happened that has soured their relationship, and we're not sure what. But they're at this point where they don't really speak to each other anymore. They reside in separate rooms of the house, and They're only 5 years into their marriage, which is a bit disappointing. Anyway, James goes out to his country house one day and has an accident on a horse, and Violet gets a letter saying that this accident happened. She panics, she gets in a carriage, she goes out to meet him, and ends up coincidentally meeting him at an inn when he's on his way back, because he woke up almost immediately and no one sent her a letter to let her know. And his reaction to her coming out after him is sort of like, why did you bother? And she takes issue with that, understandably, and goes, okay, well, I'm going to let you see how it feels to worry about someone. So she goes and hires an actor to pretend to be a doctor to say she's dying of consumption to make him worry. So like You Deserve Each Other, I thought this one had a really interesting premise where she is going to make him realize how much he loves her and appreciates her by making him worry about her. The problem is, once there was that setup, it felt like the author didn't really know where to go from there, because we have this moment, we have the diagnosis, and then what happens next? Like, Violet doesn't end up being like bedridden for the entire thing. She sort of says, oh, it comes and goes in waves and I feel better, so she goes out to balls and things. And yeah, it seemed to lose momentum after that, and just ended up being the two of them bickering for a while until she came clean and they got together. So it ended up being a bit unsatisfying, so 3 stars. The next one was The Kiss Quotient. Now this is about a woman called Stella who is on the autism spectrum, and she struggles to relate to other people, and she has struggled to have a relationship because of that, and she doesn't find the idea of sex or physical affection particularly appealing. One day one of her colleagues makes a comment of, oh well, practice makes perfect type of thing, and she takes that to heart and decides to hire a male prostitute, Michael, to teach her how to kiss and do all of that sex stuff. And they ultimately really click and end up getting together, but of course they have personal issues they need to overcome. Like, she doesn't tell him that she's on the spectrum. He also has his own issues around his profession and his family and his dreams and so on. This was finally another 5-star romance for me. It was a lot of fun. The characters had so much chemistry. I thought Michael was amazing in how understanding he tried to be. I think Stella's portrayal was really good. Even being someone who's not on the spectrum, it was really easy to identify with how uncomfortable and awkward she was. There was also this incredibly uncomfortable moment when she met his family for the first time and basically put her foot in her mouth but couldn't stop and couldn't figure out what was wrong until afterwards, and everyone was upset, and I felt for her so much in that moment. So this was a 5-star read for me, and because I liked it, I then went to look at Helen Hoang's other book, which was, one moment, The Bride Test. Now The Bride Test is in the same universe, and it follows not one of the main characters but one of Michael's friends' brothers, so sort of extended family, who also happens to be autistic. It starts in Vietnam, where his mother is looking for a bride for him, and she basically wants to send someone back to the US for the summer who is going to persist with her difficult son, who isn't really interested in romance and will just be single forever if she doesn't do anything about it. She ends up finding a girl who takes on the name Esmeralda, or Esme, who really wants to go to the US because her father's American and she thinks she might be able to track him down if he's there. So she goes over determined to make him like her, and it's this interesting dynamic where she wants to make him like her, but he's not really approachable, he's different to other men she's known in the past. He doesn't really understand her, thinks she's a nuisance, but then when she's gone or she leaves, he worries about her and feels like she's a missing piece. So it's really nice to see how that relationship develops, and there are also some quite entertaining moments, like after the first time they have sex and it's his first time doing it and he doesn't really know what he's doing, so he goes to his friends for advice, and just understandable, but also, you're laughing with them, not at them. So this was just another enjoyable, feel-good romance and another 5-star read for me. It was exactly what I was looking for at that time.
The next book I read was Us Against You, which was actually the second book in a series, and I did not realize this. However, I feel like I could read the second book without having read the first one. It is about a town called Beartown, which is somewhere in the US, I think, in a forest, and there's a neighbouring town called Headley, and both of these are hockey towns with big hockey teams, and there's an ongoing rivalry between them. The book starts when Beartown's star hockey player is leaving the town after having raped the daughter of the, not coach, but I think general manager of the hockey team. After that, the council decides to get rid of the Beartown hockey team, and it sort of destroys it destroys the soul of the town. And anyway, politics gets involved and they bring in a coach from the outside and they get the Beartown team up and running again. But the book is basically about all of the small stories of the individual characters in the town as these two towns are having a rivalry. There was a lot that was good about this book. I thought the insight into what it's like to be in a small town that only really has a sport to live for was interesting. As someone who's never been a sports person, it was interesting to get that new perspective. Some of the individual characters' stories were really moving. It was a lot of the best bad decision moments, like there was no way a lot of the characters could win with the cards they were dealt. Seeing them make the best decision they could at the time, even though there wasn't a good option, was interesting too. What bothered me a bit was the writing style. So there was a lot of breaking the fourth wall with lines like, it's not that kind of story, or she didn't bring a gun with her and she was going to wish she had, and that sort of thing, which is foreshadowing where the book is going. And I think used sparingly that can be really effective, but this happens so many times throughout the book. Like, by the end, I was really impatient with it. I'm like, I know it's not that kind of story. You've told me that it's not that kind of story. I know these guys are not going to end up being happily ever after when it comes to one of the stories in there. So yeah, other than that, it was really good, but the writing style was really frustrating and tiresome, and generally I would be in a scene really enjoying it, and then he would take us out of the scene to comment on the philosophy behind a fight, or foreshadowing something that was going to happen, or there was even a fake out with like a character's death that ended up being another character's. And by the time, like, that was the big moment of the book, and by the time we got there, like, my engagement had completely fizzled out because I was so sick of all of these it's not that kind of story moments, or she didn't do this and would regret it later, or they didn't know this decision would change everything, like that kind of thing. I think, again, if it's used sparingly, great, but if not, it gets a bit tiresome. So because of that, I ended up giving it 3 stars, and I don't know if I'll read the other one in the series, just because even though I am interested in learning more about this world, I don't want to deal with that writing style anymore. The next one was Emerett Has Never Been in Love, which is by a romance author named Anita Sunday. She does male-male romances, a lot of which are sweet, and I really do like sweet romances, and this is the first book in the new series that's going to be based on Jane Austen books, so I was like, yes, sign me up. So this book is supposed to be based on Emma. Emerett, the main character, is a little bit clueless and is trying to match up all of these people around here while missing the signals for who everyone's interested in. Meanwhile, Knightley is the Mr. Knightley. He is his best friend's dad, so older man, slightly taboo type of dynamic, who's sort of looking down on, not looking down on Emerett, but like fondly looking at Emerett going, yeah, you have no idea what's going on. I think the premise for this was interesting, but I feel like it was far too short a book to try and include the plot of Emma as well as develop this romance at the same time. I ended up feeling like there were just too many characters to keep track of. I didn't really care what happened to any of them. If I didn't already know the plot of Emma, I might have found it a little bit hard to keep track because I did know the plot of Emma. I knew exactly where everything was going. And because we spent so much time on the Emma plot, like with 2 different matchmaking scenarios with, I think, Harry, who's the Harriet character, it was just like there just wasn't enough time to build the romance. And I'm reading this because I want to see the romance. I want to see Emerett and Knightley get together. So give me that already. So I ended up giving this book 2 stars as a result. I think either Anita Sunday should have done a longer book that could incorporate both Emma and the romance, or she should have just done a straight up sweet male-on-male romance. And then the final book I read in Q1 was Hot British Boyfriend. So again, I was looking for feel-good rom-com type books. Hot British Boyfriend is about a girl, Ellie, who in the summer before senior year, I think, or maybe junior year, sometime in American high school, she is flirting with this guy at the juice bar where she works, and then is invited to his party where he's going to make an announcement about the girl he likes. And because they've been flirting, she assumes it's her. And so he gets up with the microphone and begins saying, oh, there's this girl, I want to tell her how I feel. And she just gets overwhelmed with excitement and runs up to him going, oh, of course I'll be your girlfriend. And he's sort of like, wasn't talking about you. And it turns out the entire time he's been interested in her friend who works at the juice bar with her. So poor Ellie is mortified. All of this is recorded and shared on Instagram. It becomes what she's known for. And she doesn't know how she's going to face school when they go back for the new term. But it turns out her friend Crystal, who's with this guy now, she was going to go to the UK for a semester. And she decides not to because she's got this new boyfriend. So Ellie goes, oh, I can go to the UK instead. So she goes to the UK, and one of her goals is to get a hot British boyfriend while she's there. And in her first weekend, she's at a market and sees a hot British guy, and they end up going out. The problem is that Ellie is so focused on becoming the girl who likes everything he likes that they never really develop a real bond. She's too busy trying to be what she thinks he wants rather than being herself. So this book had both pros and cons. Like, pros, I think it does genuinely capture the teenage experience and that awkwardness and how moments like that are so mortifying when you're in them. One of the things I really love about YA is how everything is so important and emotions are so heightened, because when you're that age, it's your first time going through everything. Whereas if something like that happened to me now, like I'm in my 30s, I'd be like, whatever, I was an idiot, people witnessed it, it's going to happen again, we all know this, it's fine. Whereas when you're 16, 17, it's like that is the end of the world, and I think that was captured very well. What I didn't like was the whole relationship between Ellie and, I think the guy is James, because, like I said, she's pretending to be someone else the entire time, and it's not even that she was pretending to be someone else, it's just that she felt like it was necessary and didn't even question it. So she was learning about cricket to please him and all of this stuff to please him. Yes, it's identifiable, but it really annoys me. It's like what I said about one of the other books earlier. It would be really nice to just have a girl with good self-esteem who is happy to be interested in her own stuff and own her own stuff, and if a guy likes it, great, and if he doesn't, he's not the right guy for her. And admittedly, that couldn't be the case with this book, because her journey is supposed to be realizing that he's not right for her for this reason, but it was still very frustrating to read. I think maybe, honestly, I don't even know if I would have had patience for it when I was younger. I never really cared about boys when I was younger, and definitely wouldn't have been changing my personality to make one like me. So I think, yes, the moral of the story is good. You shouldn't have to change yourself for a guy, but it was just painful and annoying to read however many pages, 200 pages of her doing this and making her friends her second priority when her friends actually know who she is and care about her. And yeah, she does come around at the end, but it was a bit tiresome to get there. So this was another 2-star read for me. So that is everything I read in Q1 of 2021. Strong rom-com focus, much stronger than usual, and I would love to find more books like The Hating Game that I love as much. So if you have anything that's in that vein, that's written really well, that has good chemistry between the leads, and you know, it's just sweet. I like sweet. Please let me know in the comments. If you have any other recommendations of good books you've read lately, please also let me know, because I am always looking for new things to read. Other than that, I will see you next time. Bye.